Section 24 of the Arabian Nights Entertainments, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Arabian Nights Entertainments, Volume 2 by Anonymous, translated by Dr. Jonathan Scott, 1754 to 1829. The story of the loves of Kummir Al Zummaun, Prince of the Isles of the Children of Khaledan, and of Badoura, Princess of China, Part 5. The following day the prince did as he had been instructed. He acquainted the king, who he was desirous of taking the air, and if he pleased would go and hunt for 2 or 3 days with Marzavan. The king gave his consent, but wished him not to be absent more than 1 night, since too much exercise at first might impair his health, and a longer absence would make him uneasy. He then ordered him to choose the best horses in the royal stable, and took particular care that nothing should be wanting for his accommodation. When all was ready, he embraced the prince, and having recommended to Marzavan to be careful of him, he let him go. Kummir Al Zummaun and Marzavan were soon mounted, when, to amuse the 2 grooms who led the spare horses, they made as if they were going to hunt, and under this pretense got as far from the city and out of the high road as was possible. When night began to approach, they alighted at a caravanserai, or inn, where they supped and slept till about midnight, when Marzavan awakened the prince, and desired his highness to let him have his dress, and to take another for himself, which was brought in his baggage. Thus equipped, they mounted the fresh horses, and after Marzavan had taken one of the groom's horses by the bridle, they left the caravanserai. At daybreak they found themselves in a forest, where 4 roads met. Here Marzavan, desiring the prince to wait for him a little, went into the wood. He then cut the throat of the groom's horse, and after having torn the suit which the prince had taken off, and besmeared it with blood, threw it into the highway. The prince inquired his reason for what he had done. He replied he was sure that when the king his father found he did not return, and should learn that he had departed without the grooms, he would suspect something wrong, and immediately send in quest of them. They who may come this way, finding this bloody habit, will conclude you are devoured by wild beasts, and that I have escaped to avoid the king's anger. The king, concluding you are dead, will stop further pursuit, and we may have leisure to continue our journey without fear of being followed. I must confess, continued Marzavan, it is a violent way of proceeding to alarm a fond father with the death of his son, but his joy will be the greater when he shall hear you are alive and happy. Brave Marzavan, replied the prince, I cannot but approve such an ingenious stratagem, or sufficiently admire your conduct. You place me under fresh obligations to you. The prince and Marzavan, being well provided for their expenses, continued their journey both by land and sea, and found no other obstacle but the length of the time which it necessarily took up. They arrived at length at the capital of China, where Marzavan, instead of going to his house, carried the prince to a public inn. They remained there incognito 3 days, to rest themselves after the fatigue of the voyage, during which time Marzavan caused an astrologer's habit to be made for the prince. The 3 days being expired, they went together to the bath, where the prince put on his astrologer's dress. From thence Marzavan conducted him to the neighborhood of the king of China's palace, where he left him to go and inform his mother of his arrival. Kummir Al Zummaun, instructed by Marzavan what he was to do, came next morning to the gate of the king's palace, and cried aloud, I am an astrologer, and am come to cure the illustrious Princess Badoura, daughter of the most high and mighty monarch Gaur, king of China, on the conditions proposed by his majesty, to marry her if I succeed, or else to lose my life for my fruitless and presumptuous attempt. Besides the guards and porters at the gate, this incident drew together a great number of people about the prince. There had been no physician, astrologer, or magician appeared for a long time, on this account, being deterred by the many tragical examples of ill success that appeared before. It was therefore thought there remained no more of these professions in the world, or none so mad as those that had already forfeited their lives. The prince's appearance, his noble air, and blooming youth made every one who saw him pity him. What mean you, sir? Said some that were nearest to him. thus to expose a life of such promising expectations to certain death? Cannot the heads you see on all the gates of this city deter you from such an undertaking? In the name of God, consider what you do. Abandon this rash attempt and depart." The prince continued firm notwithstanding all these remonstrances, and as he saw no one coming to introduce him, he repeated the same cry with a boldness that made everybody tremble. They all then exclaimed, "Let him alone. He is resolved to die. God have mercy on his youth and his soul." He then proceeded to cry a third time in the same manner, when the Grand Vizier came in person and introduced him to the King of China. As soon as the prince came into the presence, he bowed and kissed the ground. The king, who, among all that had hitherto presumptuously exposed their lives on this occasion, had not before seen one worthy of his attention, felt real compassion for Kummir Al Zummaun on account of the danger to which he exposed himself. "Young man," said he, "I can hardly believe that at this age you can have acquired experience enough to dare attempt the cure of my daughter. I wish you may succeed, and would give her to you in marriage with all my heart, and with the greatest joy, more willingly than I should have done to others that have offered themselves before you. But I must declare to you at the same time, though with great concern, that if you fail, notwithstanding your noble appearance and your youth, you must lose your head." "Sir," replied the prince, "I have infinite obligations to your majesty for the honor you design me, and the great goodness you show to a stranger. But I desire your majesty to believe I would not have come from so remote a country as I have done, the name of which perhaps may be unknown in your dominions, if I had not been certain of the cure I propose. What would not the world say of my fickleness, if after such great fatigues and so many dangers as I have undergone in the pursuit, I should abandon this generous enterprise? Even your majesty would lose that esteem you have conceived for me. If I perish, I shall die with the satisfaction of not having forfeited your good opinion. I beseech your majesty, therefore, to keep me no longer from displaying the certainty of my art by the proof I am ready to afford." The king now commanded the eunuch who had the custody of the princess to introduce Kummir Al Zummaun into her apartment, but before he would let him go, reminded him once more that he was at liberty to renounce his design. But the prince paid no regard to this, and with astonishing resolution and eagerness followed the eunuch. When they had entered a long gallery, at the end of which was the princess's apartment, the prince, who saw himself so near the object of his wishes, who had occasioned him so many tears, pushed on and got before the eunuch. The eunuch, redoubling his pace, with difficulty got up to him. "Whither so fast?" cried he, taking him by the arm. "You cannot get in without me, and it should seem you have a great desire for death, thus to run to it headlong. Not one of all those many astrologers and magicians I have introduced before made such haste as yourself to a place whence I fear you will come but too soon." "Friend," replied the prince, looking earnestly on the eunuch, and continuing his pace, "this was because none of the astrologers you speak of were so confident in their art as I am. They were certain indeed they should die if they did not succeed, but they had no certainty of their success. On this account they had reason to tremble on approaching this spot, where I am sure to find my happiness." He had just spoken these words when he reached the door. The eunuch opened it and introduced him into a great hall, whence was an entrance into the princess's apartment, divided from it only by a piece of tapestry. The prince stopped before he entered, speaking more softly to the eunuch for fear of being heard by the princess. "To convince you," said he, "there is neither presumption, nor whim, nor youthful conceit in my undertaking. I leave it to your choice whether I shall cure the princess in your presence, or where we are, without going any farther or seeing her." The eunuch was amazed to hear the prince talk to him with such confidence. He left off jeering, and said seriously to him, "It is no matter where it is done, provided it be effected. Cure her how you will. If you succeed, you will gain immortal honor, not only in this court, but over all the world." The prince replied, "It would be best then to cure her without seeing her, that you may be witness of my skill. Notwithstanding my impatience to see a princess of her rank, who is to be my wife, yet out of respect to you, I will deprive myself of that pleasure for a little while." Being furnished with everything proper for an astrologer to carry about him, he took pen, ink, and paper out of his pocket, and wrote the following billet to the princess: "The impassioned Kummir Al Zummaun cannot recite the inexpressible pain he has endured since that fatal night in which your charms deprived him of the liberty which he had resolved to preserve. He only tells you that he devoted his heart to you in your charming slumbers, those obstinate slumbers which hindered him from beholding the brightness of your piercing eyes. notwithstanding all his endeavours to oblige you to open them. He presumed to present you with his ring as a token of his passion, and to take yours in exchange, which he encloses. If you condescend to return his as a reciprocal pledge of love, he will esteem himself the happiest of mankind. If not, the sentence of death, which your refusal must draw upon him, will be received with resignation, since he will perish on account of his love for you." When the prince had finished his billet, he folded it up and enclosed in it the princess's ring. "There, friend," said he to the eunuch, "carry this to your mistress. If it does not cure her, as soon as she reads it and sees what it contains, I give you leave to tell everybody that I am the most ignorant and impudent astrologer that ever existed." The eunuch, entering the Princess of China's apartment, gave her the packet, saying, "The boldest astrologer that ever lived is arrived here, and pretends that on reading this letter and seeing what it encloses, you will be cured. I wish he may prove neither a liar nor an impostor." The Princess Badoura took the billet and opened it with indifference, but when she saw the ring, she had not patience to read it through. She rose hastily, broke the chain that held her, ran to the door, and opened it. They immediately recognized each other, tenderly embraced, and without being able to speak for excess of joy, looked at one another, wondering how they met again after their first interview. The princess's nurse, who ran to the door with her, made them come into her apartment, where the Princess Badoura gave the prince her ring, saying, "Take it. I cannot keep it without restoring yours, which I will never part with, neither can it be in better hands." The eunuch went immediately to inform the King of China of what had happened. "Sir," said he, "all the astrologers and doctors who have hitherto pretended to cure the princess were fools compared with the present. He made use neither of schemes, nor conjurations, or perfumes, nor anything else, but cured her without seeing her." The monarch was agreeably surprised at this intelligence, and going to the princess's apartment, he embraced her, and afterwards the prince, and taking his hand, joined it to the princess's, saying, "Happy stranger, whoever you are, I will keep my word and give you my daughter for your wife, though by what I see in you it is impossible for me to believe you are really what you pretend and would have me take you to be." Kummir Al Zummaun thanked the king in the most humble expressions, that he might the better show his gratitude. "As for my condition," said he, "I must own I am not an astrologer. As your majesty has guessed, I only put on the habit of one, that I might succeed the more easily in my ambition to be allied to the most potent monarch in the world. I was born a prince, and the son of a king and of a queen. My name is Kummir Al Zummaun. My father is Shah Zummaun, who now reigns over the islands that are well known by the name of the Islands of the Children of Khaledan." He then related to him his history, and how wonderful had been the origin of his love, that the princess's was altogether as marvelous, and that both were confirmed by the exchange of the two rings. When the prince had done speaking, the king said to him, "This history is so extraordinary, it deserves to be known to posterity. I will take care it shall, and the original being deposited in my royal archives, I will spread copies of it abroad, that my own kingdoms and the kingdoms around me may know it." The marriage was solemnized the same day, and the rejoicings were universal all over the empire of China. Nor was Marzavan forgotten. The king gave him an honorable post in his court, and a promise of further advancement. The prince and princess enjoyed the fullness of their wishes in the sweets of marriage, and the king kept continual feastings for several months to manifest his joy on the occasion. In the midst of these pleasures, Kummir Al Zummaun dreamt one night that he saw his father on his bed at the point of death, and heard him thus address his attendants: "My son, to whom I gave birth, my son whom I so tenderly loved, whom I bred with so much fondness, so much care, has abandoned me, and is himself the cause of my death." He awoke with a profound sigh, which alarmed the princess, who asked him the cause. "Alas, my love," replied the prince, "perhaps at the very moment while I am speaking, the king my father is no more." He then acquainted her with his melancholy dream, which occasioned him so much uneasiness. The princess, who studied to please him in everything, went to her father the next day, kissed his hand, and thus addressed him: "I have a favor to beg of your majesty, and I beseech you not to deny me, but that you may not believe I ask it at the solicitation of the prince my husband. I assure you beforehand he knows nothing of my request. It is that you will grant me your permission to go with him and visit his father." "Daughter," replied the king, "though I shall be sorry to part with you for so long a time as a journey to a place so distant will require, yet I cannot disapprove of your resolution. It is worthy of yourself. Go, child, I give you leave, but on condition that you stay no longer than a year in Shah Zummaun's court. I hope the king will agree to this, that we shall alternately see, he his son and his daughter-in-law, and I my daughter and my son-in-law." The princess communicated the King of China's consent to her husband, who was transported to receive it, and returned her thanks for this new token of her love. The King of China gave orders for preparations to be made for their departure, and when all things were ready, he accompanied the prince and princess several days' journey on their way. They parted at length with much affliction on both sides. The king embraced them, and having desired the prince to be kind to his daughter, and to love her always with the same tenderness he now did, he left them to proceed, and to divert himself hunted as he returned to his capital. When the prince and princess had recovered from their grief, they comforted themselves with considering how glad Shah Zuman would be to see them, and how they should rejoice to see the king. End of section 24.